Welcome to the Lord of the Dark. The Black Ships are the Imperium's dreaded psychic collection vessels, traveling across the galaxy to gather psychers for the Astronomicon or the Emperor's sustenance. But space is vast and dangerous. Warp storms, Xenos attacks, chaos corruption, and mechanical failures mean that countless Black Ships vanish without a trace, their cargo of thousands of psychers lost to unknown fates. What happens to these lost vessels and their tortured passengers remains one of the Imperium's darkest mysteries, with some falling to chaos, others devoured by warp entities, and a few potentially escaping to fates perhaps worse than their intended sacrifice. Let's talk about one of the most chilling, most necessary, and most utterly terrifying operations in the entire Imperium of Man, the Black Ships.
The Black Ships are a necessary evil. If one is lost, it is not just a ship that dies, but 1,000 psychic nightmares set loose upon the stars.
These vessels aren't just another fleet in the Emperor's vast armada. They're something far more sinister, far more essential, and wrapped in so much secrecy that most Imperial citizens only know them as whispered nightmares. But here's the thing that makes them truly fascinating. Without the Black Ships, the Imperium would collapse within a generation. No exaggeration, no hyperbole. The entire human civilization spanning 1,000,000 worlds would crumble into darkness and isolation. So, what exactly are these dreaded vessels, and why does the Imperium consider their grim missions sacred? The Black Ships belong to the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, specifically operating under the authority of the League of Black Ships. Their purpose is singular and absolutely non-negotiable. They travel across the galaxy, visiting every world they can reach, collecting psychers. Now, when we say collecting, we mean exactly that. They're not recruiting. They're not offering opportunities. They're harvesting human beings with psychic potential like crops from a field. And the comparison isn't accidental because that's exactly how the Imperium views it. Psychers are a resource, perhaps the most valuable and dangerous resource humanity possesses, and the Black Ships exist to ensure that resource is properly gathered, contained, and utilized before it can become a catastrophic threat. You have to understand the context here. In the 41st millennium, being born a psyker isn't a gift. It's practically a death sentence that comes in multiple flavors of horrible. Uncontrolled psychers are walking doorways to the warp, that hellish dimension of pure emotion and demonic entities that exists alongside reality. Every time an untrained psyker uses their abilities, every time they dream too vividly or feel emotions too intensely, they risk tearing a hole in the fabric of reality. Demons notice. Chaos gods take interest. And what starts as a child who can move objects with their mind or see glimpses of the future can end with entire hive cities being consumed by warp rifts and demonic incursions. The Imperium learned this lesson countless times throughout its history, written in the blood of billions. So, the Black Ships represent the Imperium's solution to this existential problem. They're massive vessels, often ancient ships that have served this purpose for thousands of years, and they're specifically designed to transport psychers across the void. But here's where it gets truly grim. The journey isn't gentle. These ships are equipped with null-tech psychic dampeners and specialized containment cells that suppress psychic abilities. The psychers aboard are essentially prisoners from the moment they're taken, treated as dangerous cargo rather than human beings. And honestly, from the Imperium's perspective, that's exactly what they are. Dangerous cargo that could doom everyone aboard if proper precautions aren't maintained. The destination for most of these collected psychers is Terra itself, Holy Terra, the throne world of the Emperor. And what awaits them there is something that divides their fates into several grim possibilities. The vast majority actually, are fed to the Golden Throne. Let that sink in for a moment. The Emperor, interred on his life-sustaining throne for 10,000 years, requires a constant supply of psychers to maintain his existence and power the Astronomicon, that psychic lighthouse that makes warp travel possible for Imperial vessels. Every single day, thousands of psychers are sacrificed, their souls consumed to keep the Emperor alive and the Astronomicon burning. Without this constant sacrifice, ships couldn't navigate the warp. The Imperium's worlds would be isolated from each other, and humanity would be easy prey for every Xeno species and Chaos faction in the galaxy. Some psychers, the strongest and most stable ones, get a different fate. They're trained as astropaths, the psychic communicators who allow messages to be sent across the vast distances of space. Others become sanctioned psychers, individuals whose abilities are bound and controlled through brutal conditioning, then assigned to Imperial Guard regiments or other organizations that need their talents. A rare few might be identified as having potential for even greater roles. But make no mistake, even these better outcomes involve soul-binding rituals, psychic lobotomies, and conditioning that would make any normal person weep. There's no happy ending waiting at the end of a black ship voyage. The crews of these vessels are themselves remarkable and terrifying individuals. Sisters of Silence, the psychic blanks who cause agony to psychers just by existing nearby, often serve aboard these ships. Their presence helps suppress the psychic cargo and makes escape or rebellion nearly impossible. The regular crew members are carefully screened, often recruited from worlds with naturally low psychic populations, and they're trained to view their cargo with clinical detachment at best and active hatred at worst. Many crew members wear protective wards and carry weapons specifically designed to deal with psychic threats. The fan community often debates the morality of the black ships, and honestly, it's one of those Warhammer topics where there's no comfortable answer. Yes, the practice is monstrous. Yes, it treats human beings as fuel. But the alternative, allowing psychers to remain uncontrolled across the Imperium, would be demonstrably worse. It's the kind of brutal pragmatism that defines the 41st millennium, where every choice is terrible and survival requires embracing horrors that would be unthinkable in any other context. The black ships are sacred not because they're good, but because they're necessary, and in the grim darkness of the far future, necessity is the only morality that matters. So how does the Imperium actually find these psychers scattered across 1,000,000 worlds? How do you locate one cursed individual among billions of ordinary humans on planets that span entire star systems? The answer is a combination of brutal efficiency, ancient technology, and a network of informants so vast it makes every other intelligence operation look like amateur work. The gathering process is where the nightmare truly begins for those unfortunate souls born with the witch mark, and it's a process refined over 10,000 years of ruthless practice. Every world in the Imperium, from the gleaming spires of hive cities to the most backwater agri-worlds, maintains some form of psycho detection protocol. On developed planets, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica works directly with local authorities, maintaining offices staffed by sanctioned psychers specifically trained to sense the awakening of psychic potential in others. These sanctioned operatives can feel the ripples in the warp that a newly manifesting psyker creates, like sharks sensing blood in water from kilometers away. They walk through crowded hab blocks, attend local festivals, and observe populations with senses that pierce beyond the material realm. When they detect something, they report it immediately, and the machinery of collection begins to turn. But here's where it gets truly grim. On most worlds, the detection isn't done by trained telepathica operatives. It's done by ordinary people, neighbors, family members, local enforcers, even friends. The Imperium has spent millennia drilling a single message into every human skull: Psykers are dangerous, psykers are cursed, and harboring a psyker brings doom upon everyone around them. This isn't just propaganda, though it certainly serves that purpose. It's actually true. An untrained psyker is a beacon in the warp, a screaming signal that attracts demons and predatory entities like moths to flame. Entire cities have been consumed because one psyker lost control. So when little Mira starts making objects float in her sleep, or young Torvis begins hearing voices that predict deaths before they happen, the family faces an impossible choice: report their own blood, or risk annihilation for everyone they know. Most choose to report. The Imperial Creed has done its work well over 10,000 years. Parents hand over children they've loved since birth, siblings betray brothers and sisters, and communities turn on members they've known for decades. The guilt is real, the grief is genuine, but the fear is stronger. And honestly, they're not wrong to be afraid. The stories of entire settlements being dragged into the warp because of one uncontrolled psyker aren't just fireside tales. They're documented incidents that the ecclesiarchy makes sure everyone knows about. Once a psyker is identified, the local authorities contain them using whatever means necessary. On civilized worlds, this might mean specialized holding cells lined with hexagrammic wards, guarded by soldiers equipped with null rods that dampen psychic abilities. On more primitive worlds, it might be as crude as chains blessed by the local priest and a cage in some dark cellar. The conditions vary wildly, but the destination is always the same. These psykers are held until the next black ship arrives in their system, which could be weeks, months, or even years, depending on the world's location and the vagaries of warp travel. The waiting period is its own special horror. Psykers in holding are kept sedated when possible, their minds dulled by chemical cocktails designed to suppress their abilities. But supplies run short, medications lose effectiveness, and sometimes the psyker's power simply overwhelms whatever crude suppression is available. Guards rotate frequently because prolonged exposure to contained psykers causes nightmares, paranoia, and occasionally spontaneous combustion. The psykers themselves exist in a twilight state, aware enough to feel terror, suppressed enough that they can't fully understand what's happening to them. Some holding facilities report that the walls themselves seem to weep in the sections where psykers are kept, that temperatures drop inexplicably, that shadows move without corresponding sources. Whether this is the psyker's influence or something attracted by their presence, no one can say for certain. When a black ship finally enters the system, the collection begins in earnest. Arvis lighters and specially modified shuttles descend from orbit, each one carrying a contingent of Sisters of Silence and their support personnel. These shuttles are themselves masterworks of psychic containment, their hulls inscribed with wards that took generations to perfect. The sisters move through collection points with terrifying efficiency, their null auras preceding them like waves of existential cold. Psykers who were screaming and thrashing moments before suddenly go limp in their presence, their powers snuffed out like candles in a hurricane. It's actually merciful in a twisted way. The collected psykers finally experience something like peace, even if that peace comes from having their very essence suppressed. The actual transfer process is disturbingly clinical. Each psyker is catalogued, tagged with identification markers that are literally burned into their flesh, and assigned a classification based on a preliminary assessment of their power level. This classification determines everything about their future: which deck they'll be held on, what level of suppression they'll receive, and ultimately, what fate awaits them at Terra. The strongest are marked for immediate transport to the deepest holds, where the containment is most severe. The weakest might be deemed suitable for lesser duties, perhaps training as astropaths or other sanctioned roles. But the vast majority falls somewhere in the middle, destined for the soul binding or the golden throne itself. Families sometimes try to watch these collections, hoping for one last glimpse of their lost loved ones. The Imperium doesn't forbid this, perhaps understanding that witnessing the collection reinforces the lesson about psychic danger. What these families see is their child, their sibling, their parent being led in chains toward shuttles that seem to drink in the light around them. The Sisters of Silence never speak, never acknowledge the weeping crowds, never show any sign that they recognize the human tragedy unfolding around them. They simply do their duty with mechanical precision, and then they're gone, ascending back to the black ship, waiting in orbit like some dark angel returning to its roost. The truly haunting part is the scale. This process happens simultaneously across thousands of worlds. Every single day, somewhere in the Imperium, shuttles are descending and psychers are being collected. The numbers are staggering. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands of psychers are gathered every Terran month, and that's considered barely sufficient to meet the Imperium's needs. Each one of those numbers represents a person, a life, a family torn apart. And yet the Imperium cannot stop, cannot slow down, cannot afford even a moment's hesitation in this grim harvest. The Astronomicon must be fed, the Emperor must be sustained, and the galaxy must be held together by the sacrifice of those cursed enough to be born with the witch sight. Once the holding cells on a world are emptied and the psychers are loaded aboard the black ship, a new phase of horror begins, one that makes the initial capture seem almost merciful by comparison. The journey aboard these vessels can last months, sometimes years, as the ship continues its circuit through the stars, gathering more cargo from dozens of additional worlds before finally setting course for Terra. And during this entire time, the psychers exist in conditions specifically designed to keep them broken, terrified, and utterly compliant. The interior of a black ship is unlike any other Imperial vessel. Where a Navy cruiser might have the grim functionality of a military installation, and a pilgrim ship might carry the desperate hope of faithful travelers, a black ship feels like a prison designed by minds that understand suffering on an intimate level. The corridors are narrow, deliberately claustrophobic, lined with psychic dampening materials that create a constant pressure against any awakened mind. The lighting is dim, casting everything in shadows that seem to move at the edge of vision. The air itself carries a metallic taste, recycled through systems that care nothing for comfort, only for keeping the cargo alive long enough to reach their destination. The psychers themselves are housed in specialized containment blocks that would make any Arbite's detention facility look like a luxury hab suite. Individual cells are cramped, barely large enough for a human to lie down, constructed from materials that actively suppress psychic ability. Many cells incorporate null field generators, creating zones of spiritual deadness that cause constant discomfort to psychically sensitive individuals. It's like being slowly suffocated on a level deeper than physical. The soul itself feels crushed, dampened, unable to reach out or connect with anything beyond the cold walls of the cell. But solitary confinement is almost a privilege compared to the alternative. Many black ships, faced with the sheer numbers of psychers they must transport, house their cargo in mass holding bays. Hundreds of psychers crammed into spaces meant for half that number, separated only by thin barriers of psychic dampening mesh. The proximity is intentional. It creates chaos, fear, and constant low-level psychic interference that makes it nearly impossible for any individual to focus their abilities. Psychers feed off each other's terror, creating feedback loops of fear and despair that keep everyone too overwhelmed to even think about resistance. The Sisters of Silence patrol these blocks constantly, their null presence washing over the psychers like waves of spiritual ice. For most captives, the approach of a sister is the most terrifying moment of their day, that growing emptiness, that sense of something fundamental being stripped away, leaves many psychers screaming or catatonic. The sisters don't speak, don't explain, don't offer any comfort. They simply observe, catalog any disturbances, and remove anyone showing signs of dangerous instability. Where those removed individuals go, the remaining psychers can only imagine, and their imaginations conjure fates worse than any reality could provide. Feeding is conducted with brutal efficiency. Nutrient paste is delivered through automated systems, bland sustenance designed only to keep bodies functional. Water is rationed carefully. Medical attention is minimal. The Imperium cares about delivering living psychers, but it doesn't particularly care about their comfort or long-term health. Injuries go untreated unless they threaten survival. Illnesses spread through the cramped conditions, and the weak simply die, their bodies removed by servitors that display no more emotion than the walls themselves. The psychological toll is immense and entirely intentional. Psychers arrive on Terra broken in spirit, stripped of any will to resist, grateful simply to have survived the journey. Many don't survive, of course. The mortality rate aboard black ships is significant. Some estimates suggest that between 10 and 20% of captured psychers die during transit, victims of despair, illness, psychic burnout, or simply giving up on life entirely. The Imperium factors this attrition into its calculations, gathering more psychers than it strictly needs to account for the inevitable losses. But perhaps the most horrifying aspect of life aboard the black ships is the constant awareness of what awaits at journey's end. The psychers know, on some level, that they're traveling toward their doom. Whether they'll be fed to the Golden Throne, trained until their minds shatter, or simply executed for being too dangerous, none of these fates offer hope. And in that hopelessness, in that crushing certainty of suffering to come, many psychers simply lose themselves entirely, their minds retreating into madness rather than face the reality of their situation. The journey breaks them long before Terra's spires come into view. Now we arrive at the heart of the mystery, the reason why so many black ships simply disappear from Imperial records, never to be seen again. To understand why these vessels vanish with such disturbing regularity, you need to understand what warp travel actually means in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, because the warp isn't just some convenient shortcut through space. It's a dimension of pure psychic energy, a realm where thoughts become reality, where emotions manifest as literal storms, and where things dwell that have hungered for mortal souls since before humanity existed. Every ship that enters the warp is essentially diving into an ocean of madness. The immaterium doesn't follow physical laws. Distance and time become meaningless concepts, and the very fabric of reality bends and warps in ways that can shatter unprepared minds. Normal Imperial vessels face tremendous danger during warp transit, protected only by their Geller fields, ancient technology that creates a bubble of real space around the ship, keeping the horrors of the immaterium at bay. When those fields hold, the crew might experience nothing more than disturbing dreams and a vague sense of unease. When they fail, even briefly, the results are catastrophic beyond description. But here's what makes black ships particularly vulnerable, and this is something that fans have debated for decades. These vessels are absolutely stuffed with psychers, thousands upon thousands of them, each one a beacon of psychic energy burning bright in the warp. To the entities that dwell in the immaterium, a black ship must look like a blazing bonfire in the darkness, a feast beyond imagination, sailing right through their domain. The psychic emanations from so many tortured, terrified minds create a signature that can be detected across vast distances in the warp. Demons are drawn to this light like sharks to blood in the water. The Sisters of Silence provide significant protection through their pariah nature, and the psychic dampening technology suppresses much of this emanation. But nothing is perfect. The sheer concentration of psychic potential aboard these vessels means that even heavily dampened, they still shine brighter than almost any other Imperial ship. Some tech priests theorize that the suppression systems actually make things worse in certain ways. All that contained psychic energy builds pressure, and if there's any breach, any momentary failure, the resulting psychic flare can be exponentially more powerful than if the psychers had simply been left unshielded. Warp storms present perhaps the most common cause of black ship disappearances. These aren't storms in any conventional sense. They're massive disturbances in the immaterium, regions where the barrier between real space and the warp thins or ruptures entirely. A warp storm can spring up without warning, catching a vessel mid-transit and trapping it in a nightmare realm where time flows differently and the laws of physics become suggestions at best. Ships have emerged from warp storms centuries after entering them. Their crews aged only days, while the Imperium they left behind has changed beyond recognition. Others emerge before they entered, creating paradoxes that the Inquisition works frantically to suppress. And countless ships never emerge at all. The Astronomicon, that psychic lighthouse powered by the Emperor and fed by sacrificed psychers, guides vessels through the warp. But its light doesn't reach everywhere, and it can be obscured by warp storms or other disturbances. A black ship caught in a region where the Astronomicon's light is blocked is essentially sailing blind through a dimension of hostile madness. Navigators can sometimes find their way through such darkness, but it requires incredible skill and no small amount of luck. Many don't succeed. Then there's the issue of Geller field failure, and this is where things get truly horrific. These ancient devices are poorly understood even by the tech priests who maintain them. The Mechanicus treats them as sacred technology, performing rituals and prayers rather than true maintenance in many cases. When a Geller field fails in the warp, the immaterium floods into the ship. Demons materialize in corridors, reality itself becomes fluid, and the crew faces horrors that most humans cannot even conceptualize. On a normal vessel, this is catastrophic. On a black ship carrying thousands of psychers, it's apocalyptic. Those psychers become conduits for demonic entities, their powers unleashed in ways they never could have imagined, their minds shattered and reformed as vessels for warp entities. The black ships employ multiple redundant Geller field generators precisely because of this vulnerability. They carry specialized tech priests who do nothing but monitor and maintain these crucial systems. The Sisters of Silence provide an additional layer of protection, their null presence creating dead zones that demons find difficult to manifest within. But space is vast, journeys are long, and entropy claims everything eventually. Components fail. Power fluctuates. Ancient systems that have operated for millennia finally give out at the worst possible moment. And when they do, a black ship becomes a death trap. There's also sabotage to consider. The enemies of the Imperium know how crucial the black ships are to humanity's survival. Chaos cults have been known to plant agents aboard these vessels, individuals who wait for the perfect moment to disable critical systems while the ship is vulnerable in the warp. Alpha Legion operatives have allegedly infiltrated black ship crews on multiple occasions, though the Inquisition denies this vehemently. Even the crew themselves can become compromised. The constant exposure to so many psychers, the whispers that seep through even the strongest shielding, the dreams that plague anyone who serves aboard these vessels for too long. Among all the dangers that can claim a black ship, none are as catastrophic or as terrifyingly unpredictable as warp storms. These aren't weather phenomena in any conventional sense. They're massive upheavals of psychic energy within the immaterium, storms of pure emotion and raw chaos that can span entire sectors and last for centuries. When a warp storm erupts in the path of a traveling vessel, or worse, materializes around a ship already in transit, the results are almost always catastrophic. And for black ships carrying thousands of psychically active individuals, these storms represent a special kind of doom that few other vessels ever face. The thing about warp storms is that they don't follow any predictable pattern. The navigators can sometimes sense them forming, can feel the currents of the immaterium shifting and churning with increasing violence. But predicting exactly where and when a storm will fully manifest is essentially impossible. One moment, a ship might be sailing through relatively calm warp space, the crew managing the usual background horrors with practiced efficiency. The next moment, reality itself tears apart as a storm of impossible magnitude crashes over them like a tidal wave of screaming madness. The Geller field, that fragile bubble of reality keeping the crew safe, suddenly faces pressures it was never designed to withstand. And aboard a black ship, those pressures are amplified exponentially by the psychic cargo locked in the holds below. When a warp storm strikes a black ship, the effects cascade through the vessel in waves of mounting catastrophe. The psychers in their cells feel it first, their minds suddenly overwhelmed by the sheer psychic noise of the storm. The careful suppression systems start to falter as they're pushed beyond their limits. Nulls collapse from the strain of trying to dampen energies that have grown 1,000-fold in intensity. The Sisters of Silence, for all their incredible power, find themselves fighting a losing battle against the tide of psychic power surging through every deck. And the Psychers themselves begin to lose what little control they had, their powers flaring wildly as the storm's energy feeds into their tortured minds. The crew of a black ship caught in a major warp storm faces impossible choices. They can try to ride it out, maintaining their course and hoping the Geller field holds until they reach calmer waters. But storms can last for days, weeks, even years in warp terms, and no ship carries enough resources to sustain operations under that kind of pressure indefinitely. They can try to drop back into real space, emergency translation out of the warp, and into the material universe. But exiting during a storm is incredibly dangerous, potentially fatal, and even if they survive the translation, they might find themselves stranded in the void between stars, years or decades away from any Imperial system. Or they can try to navigate through the storm, searching for calmer currents within the chaos. But this requires a navigator of exceptional skill and courage, willing to stare directly into the howling madness of a warp storm and somehow find a path through. The records that do exist of black ships encountering warp storms paint a picture of absolute nightmare. Ships have been found decades after disappearing, their crews dead but their vessels intact, drifting in real space as ghost ships. The logs recovered from these wrecks describe gradual system failures, the Geller field flickering and failing section by section, demons manifesting in the compromised areas while the crew retreated to ever smaller safe zones. Some logs simply end mid-sentence, the final entry cut off as whatever catastrophe claimed the ship finally reached the bridge. Others continue for months, chronicling a slow descent into madness as supplies ran out and the survivors turned on each other or were picked off one by things that had gotten inside. But many ships caught in warp storms are never found at all. They're simply swallowed by the immaterium, pulled so deep into the storm that they lose all connection to real space. These vessels can drift for what seems like days to those aboard, while centuries pass in the material universe. Some might eventually emerge, disgorged by the storm into some distant corner of the galaxy, their crews long dead and their cargo transformed into something terrible. Others might be trapped forever, endlessly circling within the storm's heart, their passengers experiencing an eternity of torment as the boundary between the warp and their own minds completely dissolves. The psychers aboard such vessels face a fate that defies comprehension, their souls slowly merging with the storm itself, becoming part of the endless screaming chaos that will eventually claim other ships in turn. The Imperium has identified certain regions of space where warp storms are particularly common or particularly violent. The transit routes connecting these areas to Terra are among the most dangerous assignments a black ship can receive, yet the tithe must be collected regardless of the risks. Ships have been lost in the same regions generation after generation, swallowed by the same ancient storms that have churned since before the Imperium existed, yet still the black ships come. If warp storms represent the blind, impersonal destruction of the immaterium, then chaos corruption represents something far more insidious. A deliberate, malevolent hunger that actively seeks out vulnerable vessels and the precious psychic cargo they carry. For the dark gods and their demonic servants, a black ship adrift in the warp isn't just another victim. It's a feast beyond imagination, a concentration of psychic souls so dense and so terrified that it blazes like a bonfire in the endless darkness. And when chaos comes for a black ship, the results are horrors that would break the minds of even the most hardened inquisitors. The corruption often begins subtly, so gradually that the crew might not recognize the danger until it's far too late. Perhaps a navigator starts seeing strange patterns in the warp currents, patterns that seem to form words or faces. Maybe a Sister of Silence notices that the whispers from the holding cells have taken on a rhythmic quality, thousands of voices unconsciously chanting in unison without knowing why. The psychers themselves might begin sharing the same dreams, nightmares of impossible geometries and entities that promise release from their suffering if only they would open themselves up. Just a little, just enough to let something through. These are the first tendrils of chaos reaching out, testing defenses, probing for weakness. The presence of so many psychers creates what the Ordo Malleus grimly refers to as a resonance cascade potential. Each psycher aboard is essentially a doorway to the warp, kept sealed through suppression technology and the null presence of the Sisters of Silence. But doors can be forced open. When the warp grows turbulent, or when a ship strays too close to regions where the barrier between reality and the immaterium grows thin, the collective psychic pressure of thousands of terrified souls can begin to erode those seals. The fear itself becomes a weapon against them. The more the psychers panic, the brighter they burn in the warp, the more attention they attract from things that hunger for exactly that kind of emotional intensity. Demonic incursion aboard a black ship typically follows a horrifying progression. First come the phenomena. Lights flickering in colors that shouldn't exist, temperature drops so severe that breath freezes instantly, sounds that seem to come from inside the walls or from within one's own skull. Crew members begin experiencing hallucinations, seeing dead relatives beckoning from shadows or watching their own hands perform actions they didn't command. The ship itself seems to change, corridors growing longer, rooms appearing where none existed before, the very metal of the hull weeping blood or whispering secrets. This is the warp bleeding through, reality becoming negotiable as the barrier weakens. Then come the possessions. Despite all precautions, some psychers are weaker than others, their mental defenses crumbling under the sustained assault of demonic attention. A single successful possession can be catastrophic. One psyker fully claimed by a demon becomes a breach point, a tear in reality through which more entities can pour. The possessed often retain enough of their original appearance to deceive guards initially, buying precious minutes during which they can sabotage containment systems or murder Sisters of Silence in their sleep. Fan theories suggest that some demons specifically target psychers with telekinetic abilities, using their powers to unlock cells and release other prisoners, creating chaos that allows for mass possession. When full demonic incursion occurs, a black ship transforms into something from humanity's deepest nightmares. Demons of all varieties manifest throughout the vessel, bloodletters carving through crew members in corridors running red with gore, plague bearers spreading supernatural diseases that rot flesh from bone in seconds, demonettes seducing victims into willing damnation, horrors of Tzeentch, warping reality itself into impossible configurations. The ship becomes a pocket of the warp made manifest, its interior geography shifting according to the whims of whatever greater demon has claimed dominion over the vessel. The fate of the Psykers during such incursions varies depending on which Chaos God servants have taken the ship. Khorne's demons typically slaughter indiscriminately, caring nothing for the psychic potential of their victims, interested only in the blood and skulls they can claim. Ships taken by Khornate forces are often found centuries later as drifting hulks filled with nothing but bones and dried blood, every soul aboard butchered in an orgy of violence. Nurgle's followers take a different approach. The Psykers are infected with demonic plagues that transform them into willing servants, their psychic abilities twisted to spread corruption and despair. These plague ships sometimes emerge from the warp as vectors of supernatural disease, their former cargo now joyfully spreading Grandfather Nurgle's gifts to any world they encounter. Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure and Pain, finds black ships particularly appealing. The concentrated suffering aboard these vessels is intoxicating to Slayanshi demons, who savor both the physical torment and the emotional anguish of the Psykers. Ships claimed by Slaanesh often don't kill their cargo. Instead, they transform the vessel into a mobile palace of excess, where Psykers are kept alive indefinitely. Their suffering refined into an art form, their psychic screams feeding demonic entities for eternity. Some inquisitorial records speak of encountering such vessels, where the original Psykers have been tormented for what they perceive as thousands of years, despite only decades passing in real time. But it's Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways, who poses perhaps the most insidious threat to black ships. The Lord of Sorcery values Psykers above almost all other mortals, seeing in them raw material for his endless schemes. Ships claimed by Tzeentchian forces don't simply corrupt their cargo, they recruit them. The demons offer knowledge, power, freedom from imperial oppression, the ability to finally embrace the gifts they were taught to fear. Psykers who accept become sorcerers in service to chaos, their considerable abilities now directed against the Imperium that once hunted them. Entire cabals of chaos sorcerers have originated from single lost black ships, their members bound by shared trauma and shared damnation. The truly terrifying possibility, one that keeps inquisitors awake at night, is that some of these corrupted vessels remain operational. Demon ships crewed by the possessed and the damned, still appearing as black ships, still transmitting proper identification codes, arriving at worlds to collect Psykers who are then delivered not to Terra, but directly into the embrace of chaos. How many such vessels might exist? How many Psykers over the millennia have been gathered by ships wearing imperial colors but serving darker masters? The Inquisition has confirmed at least a dozen such incidents across imperial history, which means the true number is almost certainly far higher. While the warp and its demonic inhabitants claim countless black ships, the material universe presents its own array of predators, xenospecies that have learned to recognize these vessels for what they truly are and hunt them with terrifying precision. The galaxy is filled with alien civilizations, and many of them have developed an acute awareness of psychic energy. To these hunters, a black ship isn't just another imperial vessel to raid or destroy. It's a treasure ship carrying the most valuable cargo imaginable, and they will go to extraordinary lengths to claim it. The Drukhari of Komara stand among the most dangerous of these Xenos predators, and their interest in black ships borders on obsession. These dark kin of the Aldari suffer from a terrible curse. Their souls are slowly being drained by Slaanesh, the Dark Prince born from their ancestors' depravity. To stave off this soul death, the Drukhari must feed on the suffering of others, absorbing the psychic energy released by torment and agony. Now imagine what a black ship represents to these eternal sadists. Thousands of psychers, each one burning brighter in the warp than ordinary humans, each one capable of producing exponentially more suffering energy than mundane victims. A single successful raid on a black ship could sustain an entire cabal for decades, could elevate an Archon's status beyond measure, could provide enough souls to keep Comorra's darkest masters satiated for years. The Drukhari have become disturbingly skilled at intercepting these vessels. Their technology allows them to traverse the webway, that ancient network of tunnels through the warp that the Eldari constructed in ages past. This means they can appear anywhere in the galaxy almost instantaneously, striking without warning and vanishing before reinforcements arrive. They've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate a black ship's route. The gravitational disturbances of translation points, the psychic echoes that linger after a vessel enters or exits the warp, the patterns of astropathic communication that reveal collection schedules. Kabbalite warriors prize black ship raids above almost all other operations, and successful raiders return to Comorra as heroes, their captives fetching astronomical prices in the flesh markets of the Dark City. But the Drukhari aren't alone in their hunger for psychic prey. The rock ghoul, those horrifying cybernetic monstrosities from the Coronis expanse, seem drawn to psychic signatures with an almost instinctual attraction. No one truly understands what drives these creatures, whether they consume psychic energy, worship it, or simply hate it with such intensity that they must destroy its sources. What's known is that Rakghoul raiding parties have intercepted black ships on multiple documented occasions, slaughtering everyone aboard in orgies of violence that leave nothing but blood-splattered corridors and mutilated corpses. They take no prisoners, seek no ransom, and leave no survivors. Ships attacked by Rakghoul are found drifting as tomb vessels, their psychic cargo butchered alongside their captors in scenes of carnage that disturb even hardened inquisitors. The sloth present perhaps an even more disturbing threat, though thankfully a rarer one. These worm-like xenos, sometimes called maggot men by those unfortunate enough to encounter them, have demonstrated a particular appetite for neural tissue and psychic matter. They infiltrate human society through their disturbing ability to wear the skins of their victims, and reports suggest they've placed agents specifically to gather intelligence about black ship movements. A sloth attack on a black ship wouldn't be a raid. It would be a harvest, with every psyker aboard consumed in ways that defy understanding. The few accounts of sloth feeding describe victims being devoured from the inside out, their brains and nervous systems extracted while they remain alive and aware. For a psyker whose very identity is tied to their mental abilities, such a death represents absolute annihilation. Even the Tyranids, those endless swarms from beyond the galaxy, have shown interest in psychic prey that exceeds their usual hunger for biomass. High fleets are drawn to psychic beacons, which is why astropaths and navigators are among the first targets when Tyranids attack. A black ship carrying thousands of psychers would blaze like a bonfire in the shadow in the warp, potentially drawing splinter fleets from across entire sectors. There are theories among the Ordo Xenos that certain Tyranid bioforms specifically evolved to consume psychic energy, creatures that would find a black ship's cargo irresistible. If a hive fleet ever successfully captured a black ship intact, the genetic material and psychic potential absorbed could spawn entirely new forms of synapse creatures, making future Tyranid incursions even more devastating. The Eldari Corsairs occupy a complex position regarding black ships. Unlike their Drukhari cousins, Corsairs don't necessarily hunt these vessels for their cargo, but they have been known to intercept black ships to rescue Eldari psychers who were mistakenly or deliberately captured by Imperial forces. The Eldari view human treatment of psychers as barbaric, and some Corsair princes consider liberating their kind from Imperial clutches a matter of honor. These rescue operations can turn deadly when Imperial forces resist, and more than one black ship has been destroyed in battles between Corsair raiders and the vessel's defenders. The Psykers aboard rarely benefit from such conflicts. Caught between alien attackers and human captors, they often perish regardless of who wins. The Imperium tries to protect its black ships through secrecy and overwhelming force, but the galaxy is vast, and predators are patient. Every black ship that translates into real space becomes vulnerable. Every collection stop a potential ambush point. The Xenos of the galaxy have millennia of experience hunting Imperial shipping, and they've learned that patience and intelligence gathering yield better results than random attacks. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, alien eyes are always watching, waiting for the moment when a black ship strays too far from protection, when its escorts are weakened, when the cargo of screaming Psykers becomes available for the taking. Not every lost black ship ends in destruction, consumption, or corruption. Sometimes, against all probability, vessels survive their catastrophic encounters with the warp, with demons, with Xenos hunters. And what emerges from these ordeals creates an entirely different category of nightmare for the Imperium. Escaped Psykers and rogue vessels represent a threat that the Inquisition considers potentially more dangerous than ships that simply vanish, because these survivors carry their cargo of untrained, traumatized psychic potential back into the galaxy, free from Imperial control and desperate enough to do absolutely anything to avoid recapture. The scenarios that lead to escape are as varied as they are improbable. Sometimes a black ship's Geller field fails partially rather than completely, allowing the vessel to limp back to real space before total demonic incursion occurs. The crew might be dead, the Sisters of Silence slain in desperate last stands, the ship's systems barely functional, but the cargo holds might remain intact, filled with Psykers who suddenly find themselves unguarded and unchained. In other cases, the ship might emerge from a warp storm decades or centuries after entering. The crew aged to dust, while the Psykers in their stasis-adjacent containment survived through means no one fully understands. The warp doesn't follow linear time, and ships have been known to reappear with their cargo alive, while everyone else aboard has been dead for centuries. When Psykers escape from a crippled black ship, their first instinct is flight. Absolute, desperate, unthinking flight from anything connected to the Imperium. These individuals have experienced the gathering, the holding cells, the psychic dampening, the screaming voyage through hell. They've watched fellow Psykers die from seizures, possession, or simple despair. They've felt the cold presence of the Sisters of Silence and the brutal efficiency of the crew. The last thing any of them wants is to be recaptured, and this terror drives them to extremes that often prove more dangerous than anything they might have faced on Terra. Some escaped Psykers scatter across whatever world or station they can reach, hiding among populations, suppressing their abilities, living in constant fear of discovery. These individuals become ticking time bombs within Imperial society. Without training, without the soul binding that might have stabilized their gifts, without any understanding of how to protect themselves from warp predators, they're vulnerable to possession, to madness, to catastrophic psychic events that can devastate entire hive blocks. A single untrained Psyker hiding in a population center can inadvertently open a portal to the warp, attract demonic attention, or trigger phenomena that result in thousands of deaths. The Imperium's harsh treatment of Psykers exists precisely because of these dangers, and escaped black ship cargo proves the wisdom of that brutality with disturbing regularity. But individual escaped Psykers represent only part of the threat. Far more dangerous are the organized groups that sometimes form in the aftermath of a black ship disaster. When dozens or hundreds of Psykers find themselves free and desperate, some inevitably band together for protection. These groups develop their own hierarchies, their own rules, their own methods of survival. The strongest psychers dominate the weaker ones, and without Imperial oversight, these power structures can become horrifically abusive. Psyker communes hidden on backwater worlds, led by the most powerful among them, practicing uncontrolled sorcery and protecting themselves through abilities that grow more dangerous with each passing year. These enclaves represent exactly the kind of threat that justified the Black Ship's existence in the first place. Some escaped groups attempt to establish themselves as powers in their own right. A psyker with sufficient ability and ruthlessness can carve out a domain on a lawless world, using their gifts to dominate local populations, establish cults, or build criminal empires. The history of the Imperium is littered with petty psyker tyrants who rose from nothing to threaten entire systems before being put down by inquisitorial forces. Many of these figures were escaped Black Ship cargo, individuals who might have served the Astronomicon or fed the Emperor, but instead chose to grasp for power with abilities they barely understood. The collateral damage from these would-be sorcerer kings can be staggering, as their untrained powers attract demonic attention and corrupt everything around them. Then there are the rogue vessels themselves, black ships that survive their disasters with enough crew and functionality to continue operating, but which have been fundamentally changed by their experiences. Mutinies occur more often than the Imperium admits, particularly when crews witness events that shatter their faith or their sanity. A black ship whose officers have been killed, whose Sisters of Silence have fallen, whose surviving crew has been traumatized beyond recovery. Such a vessel might simply flee, its remaining personnel unwilling to return to an Imperium that will execute them for failure regardless of circumstances. These rogue ships become pirates, raiders, or simply wanderers, their cargo of psychers either released, enslaved, or maintained in some twisted parody of Imperial protocol. The most disturbing rogue vessels are those where the psychers themselves have taken control. When containment fails but the ship survives, the formerly helpless cargo sometimes rises up against their captors with abilities that crew weapons cannot match. A psyker who can kill with a thought, who can manipulate minds or warp reality, is nearly unstoppable in the confined spaces of a starship. Mass uprisings aboard damaged black ships have resulted in vessels falling entirely under psyker control, their former captors dead or enslaved, their course set for destinations unknown. These ships become something unprecedented, mobile psyker communes with warp-capable transportation, able to raid for supplies, recruit sympathizers, and spread across the galaxy like a plague. The Imperium classifies such vessels as extremist-level threats, and rightly so. A single rogue black ship can carry hundreds of psychers, and if those psychers have organized themselves effectively, they represent a concentration of psychic power that rivals some of the Imperium's most dangerous enemies. Reports exist of rogue vessels that have established hidden bases on dead worlds, that have allied with Xenos species, that have even made contact with Chaos forces, though whether as servants or independent actors remains unclear. The potential for an escaped black ship to become the nucleus of a genuine psyker rebellion keeps inquisitors awake at night, because the Imperium's own gathering operation has conveniently concentrated exactly the kind of individuals who might challenge its authority. The Imperium of Man does not simply accept the loss of its black ships with resignation. Every vanished vessel represents not just a logistical failure, but a potential catastrophic threat. Thousands of psychers whose fates remain unknown, whose powers might be turned against humanity, whose souls might fuel the very enemies the Emperor has fought against for 10 millennia. The response to lost black ships involves some of the most secretive and ruthless operations the Imperium conducts, mobilizing resources that most Imperial citizens will never know exist. The Ordo Hereticus maintains specialized kill teams whose sole purpose is tracking down lost psychic cargo. These inquisitors and their retinues operate under mandates of absolute secrecy, their missions classified at levels that even planetary governors cannot access. When a black ship fails to arrive at its scheduled destination, when communication ceases and the vessel drops from all tracking systems, these hunters are activated. They begin piecing together the ship's last known trajectory, consulting with navigator houses, interrogating astropaths who might have sensed something in the warp, and following trails of evidence that can span decades and cross dozens of star systems. The resources devoted to these hunts would stagger most Imperial commanders. Entire battle groups have been diverted to investigate rumors of a single lost black ship. Inquisitorial rosettes can requisition anything from a lone assassin to a full Space Marine strike force, and when the cargo involves thousands of potentially corrupted or rogue psychers, such extreme measures are considered not just justified, but essential. The Inquisition understands what's at stake. A single powerful psyker fallen to chaos can corrupt an entire world. A ship full of them represents a threat that cannot be measured in conventional military terms. The Grey Knights, the Emperor's demon hunters, are sometimes deployed when evidence suggests chaos corruption of a lost vessel. These legendary Space Marines operate in absolute secrecy, their existence unknown to all but the highest echelons of Imperial authority. When a black ship is suspected of falling to demonic influence, when reports emerge of a vessel conducting raids that bear the hallmarks of chaos worship, the Grey Knights hunt with implacable determination. They have destroyed entire space stations to eliminate the taint of a single corrupted black ship, purged populations that made contact with escaped psychers, and erased all records of encounters that the Imperium deems too dangerous for even classified archives. The Officio Assassinorum receives contracts related to lost black ships with disturbing regularity. When escaped psychers establish themselves in positions of power, when rogue vessels fall under the control of individuals deemed too dangerous to confront directly, assassins are dispatched. Kulexis Temple Assassins, the soulless blanks whose very presence causes agony to psychers, are particularly valued in these operations. They can approach targets that would sense any other hunter from miles away, can neutralize psychic defenses that would stop entire armies, and can eliminate threats that have grown too powerful for conventional military response. But the hunts don't always succeed. The galaxy is simply too vast, the number of lost ships too great, and the resources of the Imperium too stretched across countless other threats. For every rogue vessel that's tracked down and destroyed, others slip through the net entirely. For every escaped psyker eliminated by an inquisitorial kill team, dozens more vanish into the galactic underworld, their fates unknown. The Imperium's response, however brutal and thorough, cannot possibly address every lost black ship. Some simply vanish too completely, leaving no trail to follow. Others emerge in regions so hostile that even inquisitorial authority cannot reach them. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica maintains its own investigative branches dedicated to analyzing black ship losses. These analysts study patterns in disappearances, attempting to identify particularly dangerous warp routes, Xenos hunting grounds, or chaos hotspots that claim vessels with unusual frequency. Their findings influence route planning for future missions, though the nature of warp travel means that no route can ever be considered truly safe. The data they compile is grim reading, centuries of losses, patterns that suggest intelligent predation, and statistical anomalies that hint at threats not yet fully understood. When a lost black ship is finally located, the response varies based on what's found. Vessels destroyed by warp, phenomena, or Xenos attack are investigated. Their remains searched for any surviving cargo or useful intelligence, then typically destroyed to prevent salvage. Ships that show signs of chaos corruption face immediate exterminatus-level response. No chances taken, no prisoners considered, no quarter given. The contamination risk is simply too severe. Rogue vessels that have maintained some semblance of imperial loyalty present more complex situations, sometimes resulting in negotiations, sometimes in surgical strikes, and sometimes in full military engagement when the crew refuses to surrender their freedom. Beyond the documented fates, beyond the recovered vessels and confirmed destructions, lies a vast ocean of uncertainty that haunts the deepest archives of the Inquisition. For every black ship whose end can be determined, dozens more simply vanish without explanation, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and theories so disturbing that even hardened inquisitors hesitate to voice them aloud. These darkest possibilities represent the true horror of the lost vessels, not knowing whether the fate that befell them was mercifully quick or continues to unfold across dimensions and centuries in ways that defy human comprehension. Some radical theorists within the Ordo Hereticus whisper about ships that have become something entirely new, neither destroyed nor corrupted in any conventional sense, but transformed into entities that exist outside normal classification. The concentration of psychic potential aboard a black ship is so immense that under certain impossible conditions, the collective unconscious of thousands of psychers might merge into a singular awareness. These theoretical gestalt entities would possess power beyond any individual psyker, perhaps beyond even the most powerful demons, yet would exist in a state of perpetual torment as thousands of screaming minds struggle for dominance within a shared consciousness. If such beings exist, drifting through the spaces between reality and the warp, they would represent something the Imperium has no framework to combat or even understand. The Ordo Xenos maintains classified files on encounters with vessels that appear to be black ships, but behave in ways that suggest alien intervention of unknown origin. Not Drukhari raids, not Orc attacks, not any recognized Xenos methodology, but something else entirely. Ships found with their crews and cargo simply gone, no signs of violence, no indication of warp breach, just empty corridors and silence. The implication terrifies those who study such cases, that somewhere in the galaxy, perhaps beyond the galaxy, entities exist that can pluck thousands of psychers from a vessel without leaving any trace of how or why. What use such beings might have for human psychers, what experiments or purposes they might serve, remains a mystery that some inquisitors have dedicated their entire lives to solving without success. Fan theories among those who study the deeper lore suggest even more disturbing possibilities. Some propose that certain lost black ships have found their way to stable pocket dimensions within the warp, places where time flows differently or not at all, where the psychers aboard might exist in states of eternal suffering or strange transcendence. These theoretical warp pockets could contain populations of psychers who have experienced millions of subjective years, evolving or devolving into something unrecognizable as human. If such places exist, they might occasionally intersect with real space, explaining some of the stranger encounters reported by rogue traders in the darkest reaches of the galaxy. Brief contacts with vessels that appear ancient beyond measure, crewed by beings that were once human but have become something else entirely. The most chilling theory, spoken only in the most secure chambers of the Inquisition, concerns the possibility that some lost black ships have achieved exactly what the Emperor's enemies would most desire. Not corruption into chaos worship, but something more subtle, the creation of independent human psychic civilizations hidden in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Imagine thousands of psychers, freed from their suppressant collars, learning to control their powers without imperial oversight, breeding new generations of increasingly powerful psychics, developing their own culture and technology over centuries of isolation. Such hidden enclaves would represent both humanity's greatest potential and its greatest threat, proof that psychers can thrive without the Imperium's brutal control, but also proof that uncontrolled psychic development inevitably leads down dangerous paths. The philosophical weight of the lost black ships extends beyond mere tactical concerns into questions about the very nature of the Imperium's survival strategy. Every vanished vessel represents a challenge to the assumption that the Emperor's way is the only way, that the brutal harvest of psychers serves a necessary purpose. If ships can be lost so easily, if the system bleeds so much of its precious cargo into the void, can it truly be called efficient? Can it truly be called necessary? These questions are heresy, of course, punishable by death, but they persist in the minds of those who must tally the losses and wonder whether the cure might be killing the patient as surely as the disease. What remains certain is that the mystery of the lost black ships will never be fully solved. The galaxy is too vast, the warp too unpredictable, and the forces arrayed against humanity too numerous for every fate to be documented. Somewhere out there, at this very moment, black ships are vanishing into darkness, their thousands of passengers screaming into the void as their fates diverge into possibilities both mundane and incomprehensible. Some are dying, some are being transformed, some might be escaping into futures that neither the Imperium nor its enemies can predict. And some, perhaps, are experiencing fates so strange that human language lacks the words to describe them, lost not just to the Imperium, but to reality itself, existing in states that transcend the binary of life and death, salvation and damnation. The black ships will continue their eternal harvest, and they will continue to vanish, and the Imperium will continue to wonder what becomes of the lost. It is perhaps the most honest reflection of humanity's place in the 41st millennium, sailing through darkness toward an uncertain destination, losing pieces of itself along the way, never knowing which losses might one day return to haunt it. If this journey into one of the Imperium's darkest mysteries has captured your imagination, consider subscribing to join us for more explorations into the grim darkness of the far future.